Today I'm speaking with Betsy Wecker. Betsy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
I really appreciate it. And just to give a brief bio, I don't know too much about you yet, but I'm looking forward to hearing your story. I'm going to look down here at my notes. Betsy was raised in Kentucky, but lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. And she grew up in a log cabin riding horses, which is interesting. She grew up in an evangelical Christian home. She has a deer head mounted on her wall named Clancy. She is definitely a cynic and a comedian. She loves to do exercise and all kinds of sports. And she has a lot of anti-establishment perspectives, a lot of really great ideas about how to reclaim your identity, how to stop being mad at yourself after your religious upbringing, and just how to give yourself power, agency, how to heal, a lot of healing concepts. And I love what you're doing on your YouTube channel. I should mention you're a YouTuber. That's where I know you're from. And I just appreciate what you're doing there. But I know you have probably more than that you do. So could you fill us in on what else you're up to?
Yeah, and that was great. Thank you so much. Like that's such an honor that you took the time to look into me. Yeah, so everything you said was completely accurate. Awesome job. I grew up in the church. I was raised in the Pentecostal church. My great uncle James was the pastor. Really, my great aunt Rhonda was the pastor. But of course, women couldn't be in technical leadership positions, but she really led the charge there. So yeah, grew up speaking in well, I didn't speak in tongues. I always wondered why I didn't have that capability, but it was one of those churches where people spoke in tongues, felt very moved by the Spirit, very charismatic. It was, but it felt normal to me. Went to vacation Bible school, all those sorts of things. Anyway, I'm sure we'll get more into that in a second. I am, and in terms of my career, I'm an independent brand strategist and copywriter. I've been on my own for the past 2 years, and I think I've found, that leaving the church kind of pushed me to challenge every framework that I knew, including how I kind of moved through the world, so I think I see myself as fundamentally someone who's interested in cultivating connection, both for myself and for others, and challenging myself and challenging others to find new perspectives. And professionally, I work in kind of a space that's a good marriage of analytical and creative. I am a Pilates instructor. I lift weights. I'm very active, and that's about me in a nutshell. Is that
So you work for yourself then? That's really cool.
Yeah, I've been doing it for the last couple of years, and I love it. I can't imagine going back. I can't imagine having to ask for time off. Like that's just a weird concept to me now.
Yeah,
And of
as it
course,
should be.
yeah, and it comes with of course, its own set of challenges. I think a lot of people can't imagine having to, hunt for their food, so to speak. Like I have to go out and get the work, but I've always loved responsibility. Like I don't know if you can remember as a kid in school, like if you were ever put in like a group project, I always hated that unless I got to pick my group members. Then it was great. But if
Yeah.
I was put in a group, I would just take charge. I'm like, you guys just stay over there. I'll do it.
I do. I remember the frustration of the people that wanted to take it a completely different direction too. Like, well, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah. And so maybe there's a little bit of arrogance in that, but it was more that I wanted to make sure it was done right. And either way, whether it went bad or whether it went well, which it typically did, I wanted the credit.
Yeah.
So and I think now, being on my own, gosh, I mean, and not having an ideological framework and not really trying not to identify as anything really, leaves me feeling like kind of untethered at times, but it also keeps me very in touch with life. I feel very connected it feels very honest. It feels like a very honest way to live.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that definitely shines through in your videos. And by the way, I should mention I'll have the link to Betsy's YouTube channel beneath our video if y'all want to go there next and check her out, or go there now and come back to this one later. But Betsy has some great videos, not just about religion. A lot of them are totally not about religion. They're about relationships and even about Elon Musk. So you have a whole variety there. It's really cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So,
funny.
well, I'd love to hear just about your background. I know you have a lot to
Yeah.
share about your background, and I would love if you could also please tell us more about Jesus Camp when you get to that point. I really want to hear about it. So,
Jesus
but
camp.
take us in wherever it starts.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I was raised in the Pentecostal or Assembly of God Church. I have a mother who's very much the spiritual, religious matriarch of the family, and her father, my maternal grandfather, was also that. My dad is kind of a wild man. I think he adheres to Christianity because he has a lot of guilt, and it makes him feel like he's doing something right in his life.
Yeah.
My parents split when I was 7 or 8. I have an older brother as well who I'm very close to. And as a kid, I was very quiet. I read a lot. We lived out in the country in a log cabin, so I was just by myself a lot. I had a lot of time to think.
Was it
And
literally like an actual log cabin?
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It was a house that my dad tore down that was in eastern Kentucky and brought the logs up to northern Kentucky and rebuilt it. So it's
That's
yeah, that's
awesome.
where
So
that's
you were really rural then. You were.
yeah, I mean it's pretty rural. Like it was like a neighborhood in a rural setting.
Okay.
Yes,
So
kind
you had
of.
some other kids to play with?
There were a few, like the houses were kind of, pretty far, apart, but there were like some younger kids I would play with. Um,
That's good.
and I think I have this memory, and this just came to me, like of how, some kids, I talked to some of my friends who grew up in the church, and it didn't really affect them much. Like it was just like something they did, and it was very casual, and it's not a big deal. But for me, I guess I always wanted to be a good girl, and I was a good girl, and I totally bought into the thing as much as you can as a child. But one thing that made me realize that I was different and maybe deeper in than other people was one time at school I asked a friend. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I asked a friend, um, did I say, do you know who the king is or the Lord? I don't know if I said the king or the Lord. And at the time, Bill Clinton was president, and they said, yeah, Bill Clinton. And
That's awesome.
I was like, no, I'm talking about Jesus. And they're like, who's Jesus? And I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have. And I kind of left that one alone because it was totally caught me off guard. I think, yeah. So an early example of me trying to evangelize.
That's funny.
I just, yeah. And so, I would ruminate a lot on the things I was learning in Sunday school. So we went to church, every Sunday, and we'd go to Bible school. I hated it. I hated getting up early. I mean, I liked it once I was there in terms of socializing, but I was really not a morning person as a kid. So that was frustrating for me. And yeah, and VBS, Vacation Bible School. Actually, Vacation Bible School was fun as hell. We just did arts and crafts and sang songs and played outside. But then I brought you, this is probably maybe you heard this on one of my videos, because I was reflecting on this. So one of the fun parts of VBS is that we had this competition, usually I think between the boys and the girls to, it was like a tithing competition. So all the kids would bring in their rolls of pennies or whatever they had, and you'd go up and you drop it in your bucket, and it was like on a scale. And they would do a big drum roll at the end. It was so exciting. And then, one side would drop and they would win something. It's so messed up thinking about extorting children.
And it was boys versus girls.
Typically, yeah, of course, divided up by the genders or
And
sex.
you mentioned at one point that someone asked you about the Jesus Camp videos, and that that was very similar to your background, right?
Oh, yeah. So I watched that documentary years ago, and I was like, no, this is very accurate and not at all strange to me, which is like, yeah, okay, I grew up in a cult. Because other people who have brought it up to me have been like, oh, Jesus Camp, have you seen that movie's so crazy, so crazy. I'm like, yeah, that was my childhood in a nutshell. So
When you
yeah.
look back at that, either at your own, pictures of your childhood or just at a video like that of other people, what goes through your mind?
Oh man. I used to feel incredibly resentful about it, angry. And I think that was really important for me to go through that process. Because we haven't gotten to the dissolution of my faith part, which didn't come till college and some years after.
Yeah.
And I'll be 33 this year, so it's been about a decade. But I think that process of losing, your entire framework for viewing the world requires grief, like requires that same process of like losing someone you love, because you feel like you've been lied to.
Yeah.
You feel like you question everything. It's like, I don't know if you've ever experienced infidelity. I've been in relationships or one where I experienced that, and it's like the ground is pulled out from under you, and you're like, what's real now? I don't know. So anyway, I used to have so much resentment and anger, and it was important for me to feel that. It was important for me to fully experience that pain in order to eventually move past it, which took years, and I'm probably still doing.
Does it upset you to know that there's kids going through that these days still? I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's what upsets me more than even thinking about myself, right? Because I'm on the other side of it. And, I recognize how it has formed me in some positive ways. But yeah, when it's a little jarring to still see people doing that, because I feel like so many parents are really becoming more conscious and not trying to dictate their child's entire identity and that sort of thing. I don't see it a lot because that's just not my circle, but
Right.
yeah, it's sad, and it's it's like, what can I do? And so this is like YouTube is my tiny attempt to try to just be a voice for people who are questioning, I guess.
Yeah, likewise. Well, can I ask a few questions about your growing up? Like what kind of things you were taught? What were you taught about heaven, hell, and what were you taught about how to get to heaven or how to have peace with God? Like what was the gospel to you?
I had so much fear growing up. I was just genuinely concerned. The question always was like, are you ready? Like, are you ready if you die? Like, why am I thinking about this as a 7 and 8-year-old? And I can remember just sitting in my yard and thinking about that and being like, I'm pretty sure I'm not there's no way I've earned the right to go to heaven. I lied to my mom about brushing my teeth. And I think, I was taught that it's funny. Of course, there was so much contradiction. My mom would always say, it's about the, having a relationship and, ask, this idea of like asking Jesus into your heart. And then hell was for non-believers. Hell was for people who hadn't done that, who hadn't asked Jesus into their heart, who hadn't been saved. Like this craziest lexicon in Christianity.
Well, can I ask on that point? Did they include a sense of you could be saved and know it like permanently, or could you lose your salvation? Like, could you be truly a Christian but then turn away from the faith? Like the Calvinistic perspective of if God did it, not if you were deceived, but if you truly were a Christian, God did it, then it's God that did it by definition. Therefore,
Right.
you can't, it's like God's got you in his hand. You
Yeah,
can't
you can't
undo it
recount.
because you're not holding God, he's holding you. Or was it more like, no, you can walk away, you can make God open that fist and walk away and kind of curse God and die, so to speak?
I think it was more of the former, and let's be real. I mean, I wasn't growing up with biblical scholars. Most of us weren't. And so, yeah, I mean, I can remember my mom, her oldest brother, my uncle Greg, was the coolest guy ever. He was like the youngest writer on the Johnny Carson show, this amazing comedian and comedy writer out in LA. And
Wow.
that guy did not, he wasn't a Christian, but he died. He had a heart attack kind of young, like when he was 50. And my mom saying things like, he knew Jesus, like he knew Jesus because I don't know, like I think she had this idea that almost like exposure to it was like somehow enough, like you would by osmosis like kind of receive salvation, but in the same breath, like sin was a very real thing in our household. I was, like I said, very concerned about being good. I think my brother had an entirely different experience, and we can get into like, the differences between, the sexes, but there was so much more pressure on me to be good, to be pure, all those kinds of things. And the purity discussion, we should definitely have that as well, because it's a huge piece of this.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in my house, the idea of the self was extremely demonized. And I share this in one of my videos, but this is one of my favorite stories to illustrate it. We had like a school recital, some sort of program where we entertain our parents. And we sang Whitney Houston's The Greatest Love of All. And the refrain is like, the greatest love of all is inside of me. It's like a self-love song. It's really great. And that song gave me goosebumps when I heard it. And I loved Whitney Houston. And my mom did too. And I played the song for her. And I kind of had a feeling it was going to trigger her. And sure enough, she heard that. And she's like, no, Whitney, you know better. The greatest love isn't inside of you. The greatest love is Jesus. And I just remember feeling like this weird mix of shame and resentment, like, because I think I somehow knew that she wasn't right about that. And that it was indeed like virtuous to love yourself.
But that is a very biblical concept, the idea that, put yourself to death, because it's, I mean, and maybe more the colloquial way of it saying, there's only one person on the throne. It's either you or Jesus, and it can't be both. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I was also told that, God should be before everything, like God over your family. And my mom would even say that to me, like, but I didn't believe her. I'm like, no, you love me more than this thing, this grandpa in the sky is what I always say. And it hurt my feelings when she would say that.
Did she love Jesus more than anything else?
Yeah, more than me. I mean, and she wouldn't say like, hey, I love Jesus more than you, kid. But because my mom was like extremely nurturing and extremely, like, so many ways, like a really good mom.
It's more the bad theology there.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard someone say something like this too, with the idea of they would obey God, even if it included, like, if they lived in the Old Testament times, even if it included stoning your own kids? Like, how in the Bible it says, if your son is I think disobedient and rebellious and belligerent and all that, and after a period of time, I'm sure if there's too many times that they've just truly disobeyed you as the parents, that your job is to, in the Old Testament, to take them to the city elders, stone them to death. And I've asked Christians, like, what, if you lived in that time frame, would you obey this Yahweh character and stone your kid to death? Or would you say, no, of course I won't stone my kid to death?
Right.
And I've had Christians, loved ones, say to me, of course I would obey Yahweh no matter what. And it's the idea of I love God more than anything else. No matter what he asks me to do, I will obey. It's pretty crazy when you think about it.
That's so dark. And I mean, I do have to wonder, are those people, I mean, I find it extremely hard to believe that is, I mean, because it's an abstraction, right? Like they're like, that is not real to them. Like they would, but for them to say that is bad enough. It's bad enough. But I've never heard anybody say that. I think if I asked my mom, she would probably pause, but she would say, no, absolutely not. I would never. So.
Well, what was the gospel to you growing up? Like, what was if someone said, Betsy, if you die tonight and stand before God and he says, why should I let you into heaven? What would your answer have been? Or at least what would the church have told you the answer was?
Gosh, I mean, I guess the church, it was just about, have you accepted Christ? Like, and I think that was, but that felt extremely esoteric to me, like that idea, like, what does that mean? And so I think it's like, well, so you look for more concrete things to kind of fill out that picture of like, what does it look like to accept Christ? Like, if you accept Christ, shouldn't you behave in a Christ-like way? Shouldn't you, I mean, the idea of like Jesus was perfect. Like Jesus did nothing wrong ever. And I do things wrong all the time. And I'm aware of that. So, yeah, even though they would always say it's not about, you can't earn your way into heaven, they would say things like that. Yet there was so much talk about hell, and there was so much talk about the ways we fall short, and, how unworthy we are, and how we need this entity outside of us to make us whole and to make us worthy. So
can I ask, did it sound strange at all when I'm sure you had altar calls or some version of it in the Assemblies of God Church, but where they would, you talked about, you need to accept Christ, and the bigger context is you need to accept him as your replacement, as your substitute, that, you do deserve, as you said, you're a sinner, you're unworthy, you do deserve punishment from God. Therefore, God has created a substitute to take your place, to take the punishment, to basically be your atonement. He's the one that gets punished in your stead, yes. And therefore, and you get like a swap. He takes your punishment, and you get his righteousness applied to you judicially, and that's your hope. Your hope is that you stand in Christ. You stand redeemed. You stand purified before God, because God doesn't see you; He sees Christ's righteousness instead of you. But mixed in with that is a lot of implications. I mean, that alone is enough to be like, that's weird. But you're talking about somebody meaning the Yahweh character, God. Mm-hmm. He has to kill his son, who is him. So he's killing himself, so to speak, but he's killing his son, and he has to kill, like, he can't just say, I forgive you. He has to kill somebody, and he has to have blood. Like, it can't just be, oh, you just died of a heart attack. Like Jesus had to actually shed blood, and this blood, what I call, blood magic stuff. Did it stand out to you at all at that time as strange, and you use the word cult, like, did it seem cultish, or did it just seem normal because everybody was like, yeah, this is reality. You have to have Jesus's blood covering you.
Yeah, I asked myself that question a lot, because I just had a conversation with a friend who grew up in the same church I did, and she was like, oh yeah, from the time I was like 6, I thought it was bizarre. The whole message was bizarre. And I was I felt a little jealous. Like, I felt a little silly, like, because I don't think I did. I don't think I had that thought, I mean, I'm sure somewhere buried in my subconscious I did, but because I was so motivated by, again, being good. And which is so strange because I was a really curious child. Um, and was, very interested in a lot of different things. So the fact that I didn't question that is strange. It feels like an anomaly. But
How about
it's,
even how about
yeah.
even like just the basic stories like the talking snake and the talking donkey and or the atrocities stuff to the whole go and slaughter everybody or steal their land, stone people to death for picking up sticks on the Sabbath. Did any of that stand out to you at that time?
I don't think so. I mean, I think like we were just it was so ingrained in our lives. I think maybe if it felt so central, like that stuff was so central to our lives. It wasn't like, okay, we just go to church on Sunday and then we don't really talk about it throughout the week.
Yeah.
Like we were memories, like every day we were memorizing Bible verses every day. Like so many of my books and the things I was ingesting had like all these Christian themes. My mom took us to Ken Ham Answers in Genesis children's conferences.
Oh, nice.
And we had like I just remember we got these like picture books there that like talk about how dinosaurs and people were, friends and walked around together. Yeah, yeah. So and and ideology answers feel safe, at the end of the day, they feel safe. And I think there was instability in my home, with my parents splitting up. And so maybe that was part of it. Maybe it just felt in some ways safe, despite also feeling really, really scary. My mom read the Left Behind series. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
About the Rapture, and there was this song by DC Talk. Do you remember DC Talk?
I do, yeah.
I wish we'd all been ready. It's this ridiculous song about people vanishing into thin air, and it's just like, God, it stressed me out. I remember going on a field trip in 8th grade to Kings Island, which is an amusement park, and I'm just such a weird kid. While everybody else is standing in line ready to get on the roller coaster, I just remember thinking about, oh my God, like, are we going to get on this roller coaster and then half of us are going to vanish? I mean, it was such an anxiety for me. It was almost omnipresent. Even as I'm like talking about it, I'm like feeling myself, feel those old feelings.
With that kind of side of it, the really weird fears, did you all have much fears of like demonic activity going on as well?
Yeah, so that's interesting. You should ask that. So I think, there's a lot of talk about demons and Satan, particularly in the Pentecostal church in that tradition. Like I said, my great uncle and my great aunt were the pastors there. And my grandpa Kenny, my mom's dad, was like an unofficial clergyman. And they're super sweet people, but man, yeah, they talked about seeing demons and telling them to leave, and sort of like not necessarily like exorcisms or that sort of thing, but demonic presence and Satan sort of coming after you. And yeah, and I had a lot of fears and feelings around that. And I just remember my mom, I can't remember how old I was when, but we were just driving in the car and she's like, Betsy, you've always been really sensitive to like spiritual energy or something like that, which was such a weird thing for her to say. But yeah, as a kid, I mean, I remember feeling like I had some experiences with some sort of dark presence. And I don't know, and looking back, I think I was just feeling the weight of the anxiety and this fear of am I living in a horror movie? I don't know. It was yeah, there was a lot of talk of that and how Satan kind of works to steer you away and pull you away from God. And
Yeah.
that's
We had it too with the Frank Peretti stuff. Did you ever read him? This present
familiar. Yeah.
darkness, this present darkness appears in the darkness. Like just the idea that there's demons everywhere. And I forget exactly how he described it, but he walked away with this sense that like if you're in church and you're distracted, there's a good chance that it might not have just been that you didn't eat the right breakfast or something. That it's actually like a demon trying to get your attention off of the preacher or something. And
Totally.
yeah. I was curious though, if with you mentioned the Pentecostal church, did you speak when you said, I know you said you didn't speak in tongues, but when you heard speaking in tongues, did you ever have anyone like give you a prophetic message, or did you ever see a miracle where at least as a kid you were like, how do we explain this? The person was on in a wheelchair, now they're walking, or they just got a scan and they had cancer all over. And 2 weeks later, they get another scan, and they're clear as they can be. Like, did you ever see anything that stood out to you as really? I mean, maybe at that time it would have been like a positive thing, like, "Wow, I just saw God at work here."
Yeah. No, they didn't do people would like kind of lay their hands on people and pray over them, but the speaking in tongues, they didn't. I know what you're talking about. I've been to churches like that. They didn't do a lot of like that I can remember, a lot of like prophetic kind of speaking. I didn't see anything crazy like that. It was usually the same couple of people every service. Out of the blue, it was so normal. They would just start like saying saying some crazy jibber jabber, and I remember thinking at times that's a little silly and wondering. And then like sometimes I think at VBS maybe a couple of the kids like did it. And I remember I may have had a little skepticism there because I'm like, I have no inclination to do this. Why, can these people do it and I can't? And it just it's a funny sounding thing. Let's be honest.
I wasn't exposed to the speaking in tongues thing, but the little I've seen like on YouTube, I can imagine that if you're not used to it, it could even creep you out a little bit.
Yeah, me and my brother would like, like joke around and kind of do it at home. We definitely clowned a little bit when it came to speaking in tongues. And but I never saw anything remotely miraculous.
Yeah.
And I think I may have recognized. I also, of course, grew up listening to lots of contemporary Christian music. It was just so pervasive. Everything was tied up in this stuff. And I remember thinking, like, why does it all kind of sound the same? Like there's a specific like tonal quality to the voices. Like it just always sounds very like overly emotive and same few chords. And like I think I did recognize the music as being like a little formulaic. But yeah, I still liked it. I liked the music because it's like basically algorithm. It's based on an algorithm, so it's kind of undeniable for a kid. But yeah, I think I recognized something there. It was a little weird.
Yeah. Could you tell us about anything you did with the church in terms of missions or ministry? Did you take any missions trips or do any kind of service?
Yeah, well, we I guess you could call it that. So we went on these missions trips. It was really a camp called MFuge.
Okay.
Now, and I should also note, after my great aunt and uncle left the Pentecostal church, we left that church. And so we kind of like dabbled around to a few different churches, mostly non-denominational, and actually ended up in middle school or high school at a Methodist church, which is like pretty far away from the Pentecostal church, much more staid, much more calm. So it was with the Methodist church that I went to MFuge, which was just a camp, really, but they called it a mission trip where you would go to a city like Philadelphia or Nashville. I think we went to St. Louis. I think I did like 4 trips. It's just a week, and you get put on like a track. So it would be maybe you're painting houses, or maybe you're going to like daycares, for example. And I look back on these trips, and I'm just like, they were so cringy. It was mostly white people going to inner city St. Louis, for example. And I remember we went to like an inner city daycare. Like, oh my God, it's just embarrassing, some of the things we did and said, and how we viewed those people we were interacting with as completely other. And I just remember, like, I don't know, we were so amped up one day walking around a park in one of those cities, and we were just like shouting at people like Jesus loves you. It was awful. It was so bad. And really the whole week we spent like, meeting cute boys and being ridiculous. It was, preteen fun.
That
Yeah,
expression of amped up is a good one. The way you said that, because that's what they want you to get, that mountaintop experience,
yeah,
and kind of taste the goodness and the power and the glory of God, so that when you get back home and you kind of get back to the valley of normal life, it kind of gives you that draw to be like, no, you got to get back to church. You got to get back to
oh
your
yeah.
devotions. Like, you got to be on fire for God. If you're not feeling the fire, you're not doing it right.
That's right. Yeah, and there was so much talk of that the whole week of like, you remember we had to keep this momentum going. Like we don't just go home and leave all of this behind. Like this should continue. So I felt a lot of pressure there around that. Um, but yeah, I mean, oh God, yeah, just looking back, it's like, God, it was such an embarrassing time in my life. And I remember one trip, I was so moved that I like, there was, they were collecting offering one night, and they were really like convicting us a little bit. And I remember like I had maybe $75, which was a lot for me at the time. And I'm like, I'm gonna give it all. And I gave it all to for God knows what purpose. So yeah, yeah, so that was pretty much the extent of it. I mean, we did other volunteering, but
Yeah. Was there a time where, with either with the church or with just your own private chats with God, or through your family, that you actually made a stated commitment to just say, like, God, I've known all this stuff. I've known the gospel. I've known that you died, you sent your son to die for me, and that his death and resurrection is there for me. But I've never really made it my own. Did you ever like claim it, like, God, if I didn't do it before, if it was just information in my head, it's now going from my head to my heart. I am a follower of Christ. I bow my knee and I repent of my sins. I turn from myself to the Lord. Did you ever do that?
oh sure. I think I probably did that a number of times.
Out of fear that it wasn't real the first time?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a perfect way of articulating it. Like I said, so much of my experience was wrapped up in fear and anxiety, and fear of punishment, fear of eternal damnation, that sort of thing. And I think that's true for so many people. And yeah, hell is a very powerful motivator.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, when you looked at that, and you're, it's various levels, you're in it, but you have some questions. It sounded like some things people would have preferred, probably, that you were more, active in speaking in tongues, or more just fully engaged in their belief system. But it sounded like you were 2/3 or 3/4 in, but there were some issues. At what point did anything negative start to occur that made you wonder, like you mentioned, purity culture, or whatever, however you want to take it next, but like, what happened next that began to make you start to feel uncomfortable about it all?
Yeah, it really wasn't until I went away to school, away to college. So 18, I only went like 3 hours away for school down in Kentucky. But I think just that, like, just like that physical proximity from family, from everyone I knew. as well as the first semester, freshman year, I took a class called The History of Christian Thought. So it was a religion class, but mostly a history class. And I realized I knew nothing about this the system of beliefs I'd grown up with. I knew nothing about how it all had come together, and I was sort of in shock. I just remember, and the guy who taught that class was very much an atheist, but he was definitely cynical, but I don't think he pushed anything, because there were definitely a few outspoken Christians in the class, and some great debate and conversation was had. But suddenly, I'm learning about how the Bible came together, and all the different like discrepancies between the Gospels, and I realized that I hadn't, I don't think I ever, well, I know I never read the Bible in its entirety. And then I had just, my mom had cherry picked some nice verses for me to memorize. Although some of them, looking back, I'm like, those weren't so nice. So I took that class, and I started to see some cracks for sure. And I wasn't going to church. I tried going to a couple churches, and I was just like, I don't know that I really want to. And I had the freedom to choose not to. Around that time, I started dating somebody in college who I would date all through college. And we connected. And part of the reason we connected was because we were both Christians. We went to the like Christian campus group, whatever. And so I think that kept me in it a little bit longer until I just couldn't shake it anymore. So I feel like every semester there was a class that really broke things apart. History of Christian Thought. There was just like a general world religions class taught by this amazing theatrical professor who really just like brought things to life. And you realize, God, all of civilization is just a story of people doing horrific things to each other. And yeah, I think I just started asking the very basic questions that probably a lot of people ask, like, why does God allow these things to happen? And what is the point of all this? The questions that I'm sure had always been there, but I knew I had suppressed them. And I do remember being younger and thinking like evolution might make a little sense to me, but stuffing that down. Like as soon as it would come into my mind, I was just like, no. Like, what you believe. And anyway, so back to college.
Can I interject? Go ahead. At that point, did you have a sense that the blind faith, so to speak, to just like as you face these attacks, you might say from the world or the devil, on just the truth and the beautiful worldview of the Bible, so to speak, that evolution comes in and says, no, you descended from some primates or something, and the truth of God says, no, that's garbage, you did not. And someone else says, the earth has been here for billions and billions of years. No, the earth is not that old. You're grossly deceived, and you don't know what you were talking about. And just this whole sense of the pure gospel, like you need to be saved from your sins. You are a sinner who deserves punishment. And the world saying, like you talk about the Whitney Houston song, and anything else that just is like a worldly perspective of you're supposed to learn to love yourself, or the purity culture. You're allowed to be a woman in a way that may be different than the way you were taught. Anything that comes as like an attack, were you encouraged or allowed to question it, or was it more like the virtue was faith? The virtue was almost like a blind faith to say, just trust God, trust his word. And if anybody seems to have some kind of worldly wisdom that looks appealing, in the end, it will be demolished. The truth of God will stand the test of time. Just trust him and he will see you through. Like, what was the relationship between skepticism / doubt and blind faith for you?
skepticism, like I think if I were to ask my mom, she would say, oh yeah, God created you with a mind to ask questions, but in the moment, skepticism was absolutely not encouraged at all. Now, my dad's a little different. My dad is, I mean, he's a career journalist. He's a much different person than my mom. It's kind of amazing they ended up together. Well, they didn't in the end, did they? um, so it was definitely different with my dad. Like he's extremely curious. But no, with my mom, I mean, in the moment, it was all about, um, you know, just, I mean, she would say things like, you need to know why you believe what you believe, which is ironic looking back because she didn't really know. Like if she's pushed on any idea, it's just like, well, the Bible says so, or you have to have faith, or God works in mysterious ways, that sort of thing.
Did you ever hear that phrase, that whole God said it, I believe it, that settles it, or something like that?
Yeah.
Like that's it. As long as I know what God said and I believe it, we're good.
Yeah. I think she doesn't know this, but she's an incredibly anxious person, and
Hmm.
she's she's got this very small, like, little life, as we all do. But hers is, I think, intentionally a little smaller, and these beliefs help her feel safe, and I think that's true for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So yeah, I skepticism, it's ironic because I am absolutely a skeptic nowadays. It's funny you said a cynic. I try not to be a cynic. I try to stay skeptical and not cynical, because I think a cynic kind of like, uh, just pushes back for the sake of pushing back rather than being curious.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good way to put it.
yeah.
I was curious, as you mentioned anxiety. Did you ever struggle with any kind of anxiety, either anxiety because of Christianity or the anxiety of leaving it? Like, what
Oh
was that like
God,
for you?
yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, as a kid, anxiety was, I would have never used. I didn't have that word then. Um, I guess I would have described it as fear, but no, I had incredible amounts of anxiety when it came to, just not at all feeling certain that I was good enough for, um, heaven, or just good enough in general. And leaving was such, absolutely anxiety ridden, and I fell into a really deep depression. So going back to
Hmm.
college, so my first few years is just that process of slowly, like, the ball of yarn starting to unravel. And once that starts, like, the momentum picks up pretty quickly. And then I started noticing, like, my boyfriend, who I mentioned, started having some of the same questions. We started to have conversations, but I could tell I was further along. And then he kind of pulled all the way back and, like, stepped back into it fully. And I didn't. And I knew that was going to be the beginning of the end. So he was a year ahead of me. We broke up the summer before senior year. And so partly, like, that relationship ending was really hard, but then I realized I had, like, nothing to hold on to. I'd kind of neglected my friendships, and I was, even the friends I did have, I mean, they were just typical college girls. They were just having fun and going to school and partying, and I wasn't, I was having an existential crisis. And
Hmm.
so my entire senior year, I went to class. I interestingly enough, I trained for a marathon all year, so I was in some ways healthy, but emotionally, mentally, extremely unhealthy. And I just went into this very kind of self-destructive mode,
Hmm.
where I was, I think from the outside looking in, people would be like, "Oh, you're just being a normal college student, um, drinking, drugging, guys." But it was deeper than that for me. Like, I didn't care. I didn't care about like consequences. I didn't care about hurting people, which I was doing a lot of, and I was lying to everyone. I was just like, I had no integrity whatsoever. But then I had one last hurrah with Christianity because I was so scared and I was so sad. I mean, I don't know that I've ever fully articulated it, but like I was suicidal in moments. Like I was like fully ideating. I didn't see any point. Um, and
Can I ask, did you have anyone that you could talk to at that time? Like, was anyone walking through it with you?
well, so interestingly enough, so my life looked like I'd go to class, I'd run, and I'd come to my single dorm room and just cry. I was a mess every day. And I called my mom almost every day. And I think her interpretation, because for the longest time I wasn't being honest that like I was struggling with my faith. She thought it was because of the breakup. Um, so I couldn't like I would talk to her about it, but she couldn't understand, and I wasn't telling her really truly what was going on. And so that was it. I mean, I didn't have anybody I could talk. I felt like I didn't have anybody I could talk to. So finally, I guess that spring, I went to a local church in town and I stayed after and was just like sitting there. And some lady came up to me and asked if I wanted her to pray for me. And she did. And I just started bawling with this stranger. And you know, it was sweet. Like she was a sweet lady. And I kind of appreciate that looking back. Um, and then I graduated. I was kind of stable by the time I graduated. And I moved to Cincinnati and started going to this huge church. It's like the fastest growing church in the country. It's called Crossroads. And it's very like, you know, they'll play like U2 in a service and that sort of thing. And it felt like, you know, okay, I can deal with this. But then until I realized I couldn't, because like I just finally hit a wall where I could no longer intellectually reconcile um, the faith, as watered down as it kind of was there, with, you know, what I was understanding about myself and the world. And yeah, there was no specific kind of climactic moment. It was just a gradual letting go and realizing that I could live in that space of, you know, the gray. I could live without, like, I didn't have to have the answers. And that felt freeing, actually.
Was there a particular time you remember, I mean, when you kind of had the conversation with yourself, so to speak, about like admitting to yourself where you were, just to say, I'm actually out now? Did that ever occur, and what was that like?
You know, I don't think there was a moment. I think I probably had some conversations with a few key people in my life, like my older brother, who I'm very close to. I remember going to DC to visit him and asking, like, are you still into this? Like, are you trying to go to church at all? He's like, no, not really. I'm like, but do you believe in it? And he's like, I don't really know. I mean, kind of, I don't know. And I'm like, well, can I tell you where I'm at? And just kind of sharing with him where I'd been and the questions I was having. And he's like, yeah, totally. Like that makes sense. And I mean, he basically agreed with me. And that, I think that conversation gave me a little bit of confidence, and just, you know, just getting out into the world and meeting more people and meeting more people from different walks of life. You know, I grew up in a tiny rural town with all, you know, kind of white folks believing and thinking the same things. And college was a little different, but, you know, definitely more intellectually stimulating. But coming to the city where I was around, you know, just being exposed to all different kinds of people. And I think that you know, just reminded me that like, okay, like the world is a huge place, and like how silly, like kind of maybe I think I like felt some levity around the situation finally, where it was like, gosh, it's kind of silly to think that I have all the answers, and to think that I have to is, you know, it's just kind of a funny thing. And so I think I just got to a place where I could almost laugh about it. And then once I'd spent so much time away from the church, when I would occasionally go back with like my parents for some whatever holiday, I would just look around like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is such a bizarre cult. And I like, me and my brother, I remember one Christmas Eve service, we went with my dad, and we're just sitting there like making jokes and laughing, and not like, I don't want to be mean and like mean spirited toward those people. But,
Right.
you know, if anything, we were laughing at ourselves just as much. We're like, we can't believe that this was like our lives at one point. So, yeah, not a specific
I know what you mean.
moment. Yeah.
It is very hard to, and I honestly shudder sometimes to think about how long it took me, because I was, you know, I think it was 43 when I got out, 42 or 43. But you think, why did it take me so long? But number two, if it took me that long, I could easily have seen the pieces falling in such a way that I just never got out. And to think, what if I'd spent my whole life, or what if I'd realized at age 80, you know, that this was never realized. I literally had dedicated my whole life to this delusion. And it shakes you up. And I think to a lot of it, I realize from this side of it, it's just when you grow up used to it, and you grow up knowing that there's these, you know, invisible authorities, so to speak, the authority of the Word of God, the authority of the pastor, of God through the pastor, of God through your parents, and everyone's, and usually in these groups, not all the time, but usually it's very sheltered. And so you don't usually see the other side where someone's saying, that sounds like garbage, that doesn't sound right. You don't, and if you have a sort of like a splinter in your mind, you don't get any encouragement at all to dig in. And I remember, like when I look back at mine, I was the same as you, memorized lots and lots of verses. I listened to endless sermons, endless devotional books, endless theology books that I read. I loved. I mean, I would read commentaries for fun as a teenager. Huge commentaries, just because I could. Went to Bible college to be a pastor, and went to mission school. And I don't remember almost anybody ever talking about the idea that, number one, maybe this isn't real. Like, no one ever said that. No, not a single person. And number two, just that you mentioned the discrepancies. Like, no one really dove into them. If they did, it was more like an apologetics perspective of like if you knew the Greek and the Hebrew, you would realize that there's no discrepancy. Or if you really realize the cultural background, or if you were as smart as this professor with 3 doctorates, you know, they're a Christian, they got 3 doctorates, so they must know. Or this professor so and so, he's got a doctorate in science and he's not an evolutionist, so evolution must be bunk. And so this idea that if you had a greater education, or just if you had the pure mind of God, like some of it would be like, we don't have an answer to this, but God will tell us someday when we get to heaven. And so it's like this blind faith, but this apologetics perspective of just, there's an answer out there. Don't worry about it. And that was like, it wasn't even said, that was just like this implication of, don't worry about it. God will give you answers one way or another. And in the meantime, your question is not to try to be figuring God out, because God's ways are so much higher than ours. Mm-hmm. Your need is just to be like a small child that trusts in his father, you know, trusts in your daddy's arms. Yeah. And, you know, follow him, trust him and follow him. And this whole question of these discrepancies, like what's behind this? Why are there 4 gospels instead of 1? Why didn't Jesus himself write anything? You know, and there's endless issues. I don't want to turn this into one of those, because I do a lot of other shows where we talk about the endless issues, and I'm working on projects, several big projects that are going to detail a lot of this. I mean, tons of it. But even issues like philosophical, like you brought up in one of your videos, I loved how you did it, but you talked about the idea of how we talk about how we are blessed. Do you want to elaborate on what you were thinking about when you talk about how we're blessed, but, you know, poor countries aren't?
Yeah, you know, I think it's, I mean, I heard that all the time growing up. We're blessed, or you're blessed. And I didn't think so much of it then. But now when I see that or when I hear that, it feels like it just feels incredibly narcissistic or, you
Maybe
know,
arrogant.
arrogant. I mean, yeah, there's just so much hubris, I think, wrapped up in, you know, and the things that people talk about being blessed by. A lot of times it's material things, right? It's, oh, got a new car or whatever. And I'm not even talking about just like, I'm talking about people really like not just hashtag blessed, not that sort of thing, but like, the few Christians I'm connect with on Facebook, like really praising God for some blessing. And even if it was something more than that, like the health of a child or something, so what does that say about the countless thousands of, or millions of orphans around the world? And like these people, it's like it's so tone deaf. I mean, it's so, like, to say the least, it's unbelievably myopic. Like, so when I hear that now, I mean, I think, the other thing is, I think that religion has hijacked some really beautiful language. And I think the idea of blessing someone, like, you have blessed me by asking me to, do this and be like asking these great questions is awesome. It sucks that that has such a connotation, but but yeah, I just, God, I just cringe when I see that sort of thing, because it's like you've been given this, you have favor with God, like you're like the teacher's pet, and all these other billions, millions, whatever people who are suffering are just shit out of luck, I guess.
Basically, yeah, and it's a great point, and it's related to a lot of other topics, like why are there 2-year-olds dying of cancer, and they're never going to see their third birthday. But like, why are there kids that even during this hour that we've spoken, there's probably more kids than I can count quickly who have just died of malnutrition and of starvation and other diseases that are, a lot of them are easily curable. Why is that? And why doesn't God love them enough to let them have a life? And it's very, very disturbing. And I see it, even people like put, they go to Etsy or something, they'll buy like this plaque that says blessed, and they'll hang it up above their mantle. And it's like, well, yeah, you clearly have a nice, cushy life, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. I think it's great that people have wealth, and especially generational wealth, that they can pass on to their kids. What a great gift. But what does that say about your God when he lets endless other people die? And another kind of somewhat related issue to me with that is the whole issue of hell, where you talk about, if we as Christians were right, that according to the Bible, the path is very narrow, that very few people make it, and especially as a Calvinist, from a Calvinist perspective, God chooses. He says, I've chosen Jacob and not Esau. I choose people to be vessels of honor, and I also choose people to be vessels of wrath. So God is choosing this narrow path. Very few make it, and God is the one saying, I'm the one doing it. I start the good work in you, and I will bring it to completion for the day of redemption in Christ. And when you look at that, though, percentage-wise, the majority of humanity is screwed. They're going to burn in hell. And it's like this whole question of the, and not just, I don't know if this was your version of hell that you were taught, but it doesn't end from what I was taught. You burn forever and ever and ever. So you have these people that, they're fine, upstanding people that absolutely love Lord Krishna, or they love Buddha. They love going to the temple and doing incense to Buddha, or whatever their religion is. And I'm not advocating other religions. I think they're all misleading, but just this idea that they're all wrong. We alone have this narrow set of truth, this truth that redeem us, and everyone else is pretty much toast, literally. And that, the arrogance behind that, of taking it from, we're blessed physically in this life, and you all, sorry, God didn't, you didn't get born into America, you didn't get born into a wealthy home in America. Sorry. But enjoy dying at age 3 of starvation. But like, no matter what world you lived in, you're still probably not going to make it. Chances are much better than not that you're going to burn in hell. And did that ever disturb you, thinking these neighbors, these college friends, they're not going to make it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember as a kid, growing up in this tiny town, the times we would go to, drive 30 minutes to Cincinnati. So I didn't grow up too far from here, but felt very different. When we go to the big city, um, I remember, I mean, my mom loves telling the story. I loved seeing all these different kinds of people I wasn't used to seeing. And I remember telling my mom that, it would have been cool. Like I wasn't ragging on our hometown, but it would have been cool to like grow up someplace like this where I could meet different kinds of people. Um, I remember for a little while, we had a gal come and clean the house every once a month, and she happened to be Black, and she had a little girl that she would bring with her, and I was like, I just like wanted so badly to be her best friend. Um, and anyway, all that to say, like, yeah, we totally on paper believed that if you weren't a Christian, you were going to hell. And my mom was very triggered by the mention of other religions. In fact, when yoga kind of started popping off in the 90s, one of her friends started doing yoga, and she was so disturbed by that because to her it's like, and she doesn't even know what the history of yoga whatsoever, but she knew that somehow it was, tied to some sort of Eastern religion, and um, that felt very threatening to her. I remember that. Um, so yeah, I mean, but I think if I really thought about it, like, yeah, like the thought of all these cool people who I found fascinating going to hell felt really sad to me. That I think I probably grappled with. That was probably the earliest thing I grappled with, was like this idea that, people who just happen to be born in the quote unquote wrong place were doomed. And that's something that I think never made sense to me and always felt totally unfair.
It always too made me think, how do you live your life knowing that that's happening like now? Like, how do you go out and have a nice meal? How do you sit and watch a football game knowing that people are screaming in agony at this moment, even potentially your own loved ones? Like, what if your parents had died and they're they're not believers, or at least it wasn't clear, and likelihood is that they're in hell. How do you go enjoy anything in your life knowing that there's people screaming in agony right this moment? And it sets me up to just think there's a part of it that makes me wonder if there's a like a cognitive dissonance where people kind of believe it on paper, but they don't actually believe it. Kind of like the thing of like, would you go stone your kid to obey
Yeah.
Yahweh? The answer would be yes. I would do whatever Yahweh said. But if the time came to do it, you would look in their tearful eyes and you would drop the stone and not actually stone them to death, I'd hope. But it's like you know that people are burning in hell because that's what you're taught. But could you actually live your life? And what would be more important? Like, why would you want to focus on building up a 401k, or getting us a vacation, an extra vacation a year, and going to the lake house when people's salvation is at stake? Like, what could be more important? Well,
Right.
salvation, like vacations don't matter anymore. Nothing matters anymore. The only thing that
Nothing.
matters is getting people out. And this whole idea, when you set it up that way, you go back to the beginning. You say, well, then why did God let Satan in that garden? Like, why would God take these little children, so to speak, and put the enemy of their souls right there with them? Why wouldn't he lock that garden up so tight that they couldn't ever have fallen in the first place?
Yeah.
It's a lot. I'm skipping over a lot of philosophical issues, but just saying, it just gets deeper and deeper and more messy. Where like, it sounds like
Yeah.
this God's a bit of a psycho.
He's it sounds like a psycho. It sounds like a game. It sounds like a game
Yes.
he's playing. The other thing is that God seems like a narcissist because, or he seems very, yeah, he just seems very insecure because he needs us to worship him all the time. And that was another thing. Like I remember, here's one thing I definitely had an issue with as a kid. When I would hear about heaven and what heaven looks like, which, as it was relayed to me, was a place where you basically get to worship God for all of humanity. You and the angels up there. I guess you also get to live in a mansion of some sort, but sounds like you're basically in church forever. And I was like, that doesn't, I thought heaven is like, like for me, it's like a field with horses and puppies and whatever else I want. This doesn't sound very enticing. And yeah, and God just seems like this megalomaniac who just really needs validation.
The thing that gets me is that people, they pick and choose which verses they want to validate. So they'll say, God has so much love for you. I mean, you listen to a worship service, at a typical church on Sunday. It's just God's love is overflowing. It's overpowering. Oh, the deep, deep love of God. But it's like, well, wait a second. Isn't that the same God who commanded genocide, who commanded ethnic cleansing, who commanded land theft, who commanded genital mutilation? Isn't he the same God who said, kill everybody, kill the moms and dads, the little babies, but take the little girls that aren't married yet, they're virgins. If they got married last week and had sex, too late, they die. But if they're still virgins, keep them alive. Like that's that God. And the Israelites, when they ask for bread and water, he gives it to them, and then a minute later he sends vipers to kill them all. And like it's very, very selective. And you're talking about stuff like obviously the normal stuff like blood magic and scapegoating, but you're talking about tribalism, advanced discrimination. Nehemiah tells everybody, hey, if you got a non-Jewish wife, send them away. Like, what would a woman in that culture do if you literally lost your entire family? Like you just got sent out to the desert to die. Like, what do you do? Mass murder, the warmongering. I'm just looking through some notes here that I made for
What's
interview.
what's the verse about the bears? Like God sending some bears to kill a group of children? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Elisha, he was bald. He was going on the way to, I think, Carmel, and 42 children made fun of him for being bald. So he curses them in the name of God and calls two bears to come out of the forest, I believe, and slaughter them.
There you go.
And what they don't tell you, I'm going to sit there and say, what they don't tell you is that part of it is really bizarre. That's astrotheology. Are you familiar with that part of it?
No, do tell.
So, and I'll keep this short because I want to give us time to get to purity culture before we wrap up. But
Yeah.
So Elijah, he ends up going to heaven in a chariot of fire across the sky, and his follower is Elisha, who's got a bald head.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you imagine what is the golden chariot that goes across the sky every day?
Mm-hmm.
The sun. Well, what looks like it's bald that comes at night? The moon. So he calls out two bears. Are there any bears in the sky? Well, yeah, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor are a constellation of two bears. How many star doublets or couplets do they have in that constellation? 42. How many kids did they kill? 42. It's like this whole thing is star stuff. It's You look at Jesus walking on the water. That's like classic Orion astrotheology. And what's amazing to me too with this is that people don't realize what's woven in. And this is I'll just give a quick plug for what I'm working on, but there is so much more to this than people realize. A quick example. Do you know about Pythagoras in the New Testament?
No.
So John 21, Jesus is walking by and he says, have you all caught any fish? They say no. And he says, lower the nets again. And they say, we've already been fishing all night, but if you tell us to, we'll do it one more time. And they catch more fish than their nets can hold. They bring them in and they count them. Do you remember how many fish he captures? 153.
Okay.
Well, the Pythagoreans were into math magic like crazy. To them, the world was all math. Everything was math, triangles, sacred geometry. And the number 153 is one of their magic numbers, which I could explain, and I'll explain that another time. But 153 was like absolutely magic numbers. And there was a story of Pythagoras where he had gone by fishermen and he had said that he'd made this bet with them. He said, if I can tell you how many fish you're about to catch, if I give you the number right now and I'm right, you have to put the fish back. And they apparently made the agreement and he was right. They don't tell you in that story what the number was, but again, Pythagoreans loved 153. It was one of their core numbers. And so in the Jesus story, Jesus comes and says something very similar, and the number of fish is exactly 153. It's Pythagoreanism to it, pretty much to a T. But then you look at other passages and they weave it in again and again, where you look at Anna in the New Testament in Luke 2, I believe it is, where she's this woman that's in the temple. And it says something like she was married till she was this age, and then she was a widow, and she's been in the temple till she's 84 years old. You look at the numbers, and they're Pythagorean numbers. You get to Revelation, you look at the dimensions of the new city and all these different numbers. They're Pythagorean numbers. And the crazy thing is the Essenes, which were in the time of they may have been related to the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls community, but the Essenes, who were all part of this, a couple hundred years before Christ, they were well known as dedicated Pythagoreans. And so you get all this background, and you look in the Gospel of Mark, and it's structured according to the zodiac in the right order of the signs, the Gospel of Mark. And you're like, and Luke and Acts has the Iliad and the Odyssey from Homer woven into it over and over. And you're like, this, I didn't even realize what this book was about. Like, I'm just like,
that's amazing. Blowing my mind right now.
There is so much, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But anyway, it staggers me that most people that love this stuff, they can literally read this stuff over and over and over and have no idea where it's coming from. No idea whatsoever.
Exactly. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I know we're short on time. I didn't want to cut you off from the purity culture topic. Do you want to take us into that here to wrap us up?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing I always say about, growing up in Christianity as it pertains to my sexuality is I just felt completely removed from my body, and was certainly taught that sex outside of marriage was sinful, and that even masturbation was sinful, and and that your body, and specifically your genitals, are just kind of gross and you should hide them. I have this memory of being a teenager, and I was always doing like funky stuff with my clothes, and I would like buy t-shirts from the thrift store and like cut off the top so it's kind of like off my shoulder. And I remember my mom looking at me one time with this shirt where you could see my shoulder, and she said, "Betsy, you look like a slut." And I still wore it though. I had some, I was a stubborn kid. But I asked for a purity ring for my probably 14th birthday or something. We went to the Christian bookstore. I picked it out. And I mean, I wasn't like super popular with boys like for most of high school. So like it wasn't really like a problem, but
and the purity ring is just to kind of promise to God and to your church family that you're going to be pure till you're married.
Yeah, you're going to save yourself from marriage. I read what was the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. That author has since come out against purity culture. Really interesting. A lot of those people have,
and even against Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had this ring that I wore very proudly, and and I didn't masturbate. I didn't do any of those things. It's not that I didn't have like natural urges, but I didn't really know what to do about them, and I knew I shouldn't essentially do anything about them. And so, but none of my friends had purity rings. Like, it was very weird. Like, I was the one, always going all the way with that stuff, with Christianity, with, the whole thing.
I imagine it felt good at the time, though, to kind of be a leader or an example of how on fire for the Lord you were.
Yeah. Although, I wasn't, like I said, I was proud of it in a way, but it's not like I didn't talk about it. Like, I didn't if somebody would have asked me, like, what's that little ring about? I would tell them, but it wasn't like I was going around. I remember freshman year, I had a girlfriend who was definitely more popular with the boys, and I got so frustrated with her one time because she was such a like flirt, and I was just jealous that I wasn't that way. And I remember I called her a slut in the middle of English class. And I felt very justified in doing that. And yeah, I think like purity culture extends beyond the church. I think like especially with girls, and there's lots of shaming that happens, and a lot of like, if people find out you've been with a guy in any capacity, there's like this, I think it's a combination of jealousy and like superiority that comes out. Anyhow, when I went away to college, and I have no problem, hopefully this isn't TMI, I don't mind sharing it. I did with that Christian boyfriend, we lost our virginity together. And interestingly enough, he felt extremely guilty, and I did not. I didn't feel guilty at all. And that caused another rift in our relationship because, this thing that felt special to me felt very wrong to him. And then after we broke up, I ended up mailing him the ring. I'm like, well, this is yours now. So yeah. And then I remember part of the aftermath, part of, and I did share this with my mom at the time. I felt this weight around having lost I thought I was going to marry him at the time. And so I think, I did end up having all this guilt and shame around losing my virginity to a person who is not going to be my partner. So, and then that sent me, as I mentioned, sort of into a spiral where I was just, I was like, well, I guess I'm damaged goods, so who cares?
That's exactly what it does to you. Yeah. It's a purity culture / virginity culture. Like if you have crossed that line, yeah, it's like you're somehow damaged goods, and it's crazy. It's crazy what it does to people's psyches. Can I ask too, did you have with that, even maybe beforehand, but even after, did you have this sense too of you really have to cover up because you're kind of like, and by nature of what you look like, you are inherently a temptation to the men of God around you who need to be kept pure. So, watch the curves, watch yourself. Yeah. Don't catch their eyes. Don't, whatever it is, don't let the bra straps show. Just whatever it was, don't catch their eyes because they need to keep their focus on Christ, not on you. And therefore, like your body is kind of like by default. I mean, it's kind of on paper. It's like you're officially a precious child of God, and you're you're a precious stone to be protected. But if effectively, it kind of puts you in the spot of like you're the bad person because you can walk into a room and just be yourself, and the fact that you have curves that show is itself a temptation. Therefore, you need to diminish that or find some way to mitigate the temptation factor.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, my older brother never wore a shirt growing up, never. And he's a good-looking young man, and there was never a word spoken about that and what what it might do to a young lady to see him like that. But there was constant, it's from such a young age. It's so sick. It's like, it's like as soon as you start developing, it's like a conversation, and yeah, I think it takes so long to sort of untangle those beliefs, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm still doing it, but now, so yeah, for the longest time you're taught to be responsible for other people, and that goes way beyond just how you're dressing. It goes, like you're responsible for other people's feelings, you're responsible, and it's like, so that has been a huge part of my work, is that unlearning that belief and knowing that, finding freedom in the fact that I'm only responsible for me. Of course, I want to have a positive impact on other people, but Yeah, I think I've mostly let go of that, but it was God, it's a prison for sure.
Yeah, and it seems like a side effect that I hear a lot of people talk about is that when they do get married and they want to finally enjoy it, it's very hard to flip that switch and suddenly be able to just be like, yeah, this sexuality that I've thought of as so negative for so long is suddenly such a positive thing. Like that switch doesn't always flip, and I think some people probably get used to it and they philosophically work their way up to a healthy spot. But I've heard some stories where people basically like get married, hate sex, and want to die. And it's like this, it's like it just breaks my heart. And I think too, to reflect on your statement about you're responsible for the people, one of the other bigger pictures for Christians is like you're responsible with the gospel. Like if if someone else is in sin, or if someone else clearly isn't living for Christ or doesn't know Christ, you're responsible. And if you choose to be quiet, even if it's just because you're an introvert or whatever, if you choose to not live or preach the gospel, you might be responsible for them going to hell. And it's like a nonstop, from the littlest things about the way you dress to the biggest things about what you preach. You're responsible. And to be able to say, no, I'm not. Other people can choose the right thing, and I'm not responsible for them. I want to bless them, like you said, the
Yeah,
blessing. I want to bless their socks off, and I
yeah,
want to help them, but I'm not responsible. If they choose unhealthiness or toxicity or whatever they choose, that's on them.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and and so many people who didn't experience what we experienced growing up deal with that too, right? It's not completely unique, but having all those, having all the layers, all the layers of concepts on top of it is just it's a lot of weight, it's a lot of baggage. But
Yeah. Well, final question here as we wrap up. What's it like now that you're out? Have you had, I know this, there's been some bumps in the road, but
yeah,
would you say you have peace at this point as a non-Christian?
oh yeah. I mean, and maybe we should have another conversation sometime, but I think it's been a combination of me just kind of working on myself and unraveling my past and understanding why I am the way I am, and appreciating that and understanding that for better, for worse, you know, the way I was brought up made me into this person who now has, you know, I have so much empathy for people who are caught in that. And at the same time, I am able to see frameworks, these invisible frameworks that other people aren't, and question them and feel totally fine doing that. And no, I feel very free. I feel very at peace. And I've also definitely dabble in the psychedelic world and um use them as medicine and as therapy, and those have kind of exposed me to maybe a new understanding of spirituality and connectedness that feels so much more real and profound and wonderful, like in the true sense of that word,
Mm,
than the Christianity I was raised in. I think, you know, so much of religion, they use these words like awe and wonder and majesty and awesome, but they don't, the Christians I know don't they don't experience those things. I experience those things every day. And yeah, I don't know how to tell, like, it's so hard to tell people, like, there's no linear process, there's no checklist, unfortunately. It's just it's just taking things day by day and allowing yourself to ask some questions and finding good community, and finding voices like yours and hopefully mine that just like remind you you're not alone, you
yeah,
know? So,
absolutely. It's so true. And I think the voices are getting much more wide and broad in the community, and our voices are getting stronger. It's so important to get connected, because it does feel like a lot of people are doing it alone, and it breaks my
yeah,
heart to see that. But well,
yeah, but it's changing for sure. I mean, it's way different from when I was going through this. So,
yeah,
yeah, it feels like there's a growing, thriving community. So,
Yeah, the momentum is definitely there. Well, I know we probably could talk about some more, but for the sake of time, we'll wrap up here. But I just want to say thank you again. We've been talking with Betsy Wecker. For everyone that hasn't seen her channel yet, please click on the link beneath my video, like and subscribe to her channel, and check out what she's already done. You've got some very interesting topics there, and if nothing else, you have to go see her deer named Clancy. But thank you so much for your voice in this, and I do hope that we can connect again and talk about some more of these subjects. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tim. You're doing awesome work, and I just I'm cheering you on for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Have a great day.
All right, you too. See ya.
Thank you.